I just want to say how incredibly lovely this has been so far. It's just the different faiths coming together. You've got the music. This is a great morning. My name is Saloumeh Bozorgzadeh, and it's a mouthful. I'm sure you'll find it in your bulletins. And I'm talking about Joseph as it relates to Islam. And I want to give the disclaimer that this is just my understanding, and it's basically based on what I have understood and utilized through the teachings of Islamic Sufism. So that's my disclaimer. All right, Joseph. The story of Joseph not only appears in the Hebrew Bible, but it's the longest single story in the Holy Quran. And there's an entire chapter 12, that's dedicated to Joseph. And the two versions, I was reading the two versions, and I don't know how many of you have read the two versions. They're very similar. The only differences really are in the details. Like some places the Quran goes into details about certain aspects of Joseph's lives. Other times it's the Hebrew Bible goes into more detail. And the chapter in the Quran ends at the reunion of Jacob and Joseph, whereas the Bible continues on. The Quran says that, I should say this, the Islamic Sufism views the holy books as handbooks, like all of them. The Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, they're all handbooks for me. It's not about anybody outside of me, but it's a way for me to understand myself. And in the Holy Quran, actually, in the chapter of Joseph, verse 7, it says, "Verily in Joseph and his brethren are signs for seekers." So reading that and knowing that I'm on this journey, Islamic Sufism has to do with a journey that each individual goes on, whether they like it or not. It's a journey to recognize their true self, the I. And so this is important when I'm reading the story of Joseph through this lens, that I need to look at it and see how does it relate to me. This true I that we talk about is the more delicate part of ourselves. It's the part that oftentimes we veil with ego, with selfishness, jealousy, hatred. Sometimes we distract ourselves with the world and the carnal desires and the colors of the world. And the journey that they talk about within Islamic Sufism is about removing these veils. Removing these veils through purification so that you can discover the I in order to be in balance and harmony. So when the Holy Quran says, "Verily in Joseph and his brethren are signs for seekers," it's a reminder to read it very carefully and see, where am I in this incredible story? Chapter 12, verse 3, it says, "We do relate to you the most beautiful of stories." I mean, this is the first time that even in the Quran it says this is the most beautiful of stories, the story of Joseph. And I will tell you this, in Islamic Sufism, all the men of God have titles that basically describe their purpose. So Moses is called Kalimullah, which means the words of God. Right? So you realize, that's Moses is speaking the words of God. Joseph is referred to as Wajihullah, which means the image of God. And as both the Bible and the Quran have stated, that God has created us in his image. So when we're talking about Joseph as it relates to Islamic Sufism, it's about the image of God that is within all of us. It can't be this face because we all look different. How can we all be created in the image of God if we look so different? So it's about this image, this Joseph that is within each and every one of us, that is one and the same with God. So the story of Joseph is a story about me. It's a story about I, and this is why it is the most beautiful of stories for each person. And as I started reading, so just to kind of outline how this path looked for me, as I was reading the story of Joseph, I began to see myself more and more in the story. Not just in Joseph, but admittedly in the brothers. I began to see my selfishness. I began to see these characteristics of these brothers that I too have. Hatred, envy, ego. And it talked about all these things that Professor Anfal, who's the current Sufi master of our school, he talks about social diseases, right? And so these are all social diseases that we all have, the ego, the selfishness, and it talks about how these brothers, having these, squelch Joseph, right? They throw him in the well in the Quran or the pit in the Bible. And I thought to myself, and I said, wow, I do that to myself quite a bit. How many times do I just kind of squash my character for the sake of engaging in selfishness or ego or hatred? So then, as I continued to read, it talked about Joseph being sold for a miserable price, for nothing. And again, I thought to myself, how many times have I sold my character for compliments or because I wanted to get people's approval or praise? And I began to relate to it even more. And as the story continued, you get to verse 23, which was about Zuleika. Zuleika was the wife of Potiphar, who tries to seduce Joseph. And in the verse it states, "But she, in whose house he was, sought to seduce him from his true self." And again, I said, oh, here I go again. Yeah, that would be me. It's very humbling to read this. I got to tell you this story. But Zuleika, the concept of Zuleika is how I understood it, is it's my body. Zuleika, it's in the house that which Joseph resides. This soul, this I, whatever you want to call it, that is Joseph, that's in the image of God, resides within me. And here is Zuleika with all, just trying to seduce me with everything in the world. I'm attracted over here. I run over there. I think that's incredible. And again, I'm just ignoring myself and my true self time and time again. I spend so much time fixating outside of me that I miss what's happening within me. I could really go on for hours about all these examples. It's quite a long story. And when I started reading the Hebrew Bible, it went on even longer. So I was pretty upset with myself, quite honestly, at one point. But I will say one last part that I think probably resonates with a lot of people. And it was the part where Joseph is in prison. And he interprets a dream for the cupbearer. And he interprets this dream for him. And the cupbearer is very grateful. And Joseph says, when you get out of here, don't forget me. Don't forget me and come back. Come back and, get me out of here. And, the cupbearer leaves, and he goes back, and he regains his position and his power, and that was it. He forgot. And this part actually hit me this morning, where I said, oh my gosh, how many times do I pray to God? How many times do I make little deals, like get me out of this bind? I will volunteer for the rest of my life. I will pray every second. And the minute I get what I want, I completely forget. So you see, it's a story about me. At least this is how the process unfolded for me. It's different for each person, depending on their journey. But what I do know is these verses and stories, these men of God, have been sent as guides. And it's all about this journey that I have to make from me, that I've created, to the true I, that is the very image of God. So in terms of the interfaith work, because this is an interfaith event, I see us as the same. We may slap different labels upon ourselves based on where we're born, social rules, our families, our skin color, hair color. But in the end, at the end of the day, there's only one reality. There's one God. There's one Joseph. Actually, that's all extra. There's only one at the end. And so I'm going to leave you with an excerpt from a poem from the great Sufi master of MTO Shah Masudi, Hazrat Shah Masood Sadr Anwar, and he says, "The I, freedom from self did proclaim. The soul, the body's bonds did disclaim. The mount of love illumined became. My Joseph, the well's depths overcame."